is their data. It's like I'm moving from platform X to Neos or Excel sheet to Neos. How do I bring my data over with me?
Yeah.
And we get that all the time because they need the data that they have
Yeah.
collected over the years.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting when you're doing conversion or a migration or a transition from an on-prem system or, sort of not a system at all, like with the spreadsheets and all of that.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hamid, Kohan, President and CEO of LegalSoft. Welcome to the LegalSoft podcast, and I'm happy to announce our new guest today, Jim Garrett from New Assembly. Hi, Jim. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing today?
Very good. Thanks for joining us today. I'm sure it's going to be a very informative podcast for our audience. And I'm sure I have a lot of questions, and I'm sure you have a lot of answers for them that will help our audience to get a better understanding of Neos and how you guys operate your software and your solutions and all of your advice about those folks out there who's looking for a practice management CRM solution for their law practices. So can you give me a little brief about yourself and Neos so we can start?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Jim Garrett. I am the Chief Technology Officer of Assembly Software. Our flagship product in the legal industry is called Neos. It's a purely SaaS-based case management platform. It's built into cloud, aimed at making workflows extensible and configurable so that we can help you practice law the way you practice law, not the way that our software tells you should do it. So we're very bent on configuring our software to help you do the job the way you do it. Personally, I've been in technology for 30 years, always in a very technical role. I've been a programmer, worked my way up all the way to the CTO of Assembly, spent the most of my career in the medical industry, delivering products for people running electronic medical records and practice management on that side. Spent some time in financial, and realistically, it's interesting to see how much of the problems in all of these industries are solved similarly with technology and the patterns you can bring that are globally applicable and helpful.
Great. Thank you for that. LegalSoft, since we are into a lot of virtual staffing, virtual operations, and virtual marketing and so forth for the law firms, so we come across a lot of situations where the law firms are not properly equipped with the right software to manage their resources, manage their clients, and have a good understanding of where all the cases are at and the status and so forth. So one of the first things I always do or ask and said, what is your practice type? What's your CRM? And if you don't, if you have too many practice type and no CRM, you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
And if you know your practice type and still have no CRM, then you're still in trouble. Yeah. A lot of people are still using spreadsheets and Google Sheets and all kinds of stuff, which is mind-boggling, where the state of technology we are at. In one hand, we're talking about AI, and then people are still on Google Sheets, which is AI is way past the CRM, and then we're still, it's just like I'm using my pager and my fax machine still. That's how it is. We come across that a lot. Yes. So we're telling them, okay, you need to find one that fits it, and this is what we recommend. So we do recommend Neos and other software for different kind of practice types, especially with going virtual, which is a lot of our game. For the audience, let them know how, those people who are already using virtual staffing, virtual offices and so forth, or planning or already in it, how the Neo software helps them to actually operate virtually.
Sure. So, the biggest constraint or the biggest thing that you should worry about when you're trying to work more virtually is making sure that you have repeatable processes that, it's less about the way that Jim does a thing today, and it's more about the way that our firm operates, and that it's very repeatable and it's documented and it's enforced as a standard business process. And when you do that, it enables you to worry less about, the historic management by walking around and making sure that everybody's doing their job, because you have a process that is creating data along the way that you can report against, that you can see that your cases are moving through, that the management of the process is happening, that staff are being productive, that they're spending their time on the right things, the things that matter to your business. And when you're picking a software, much like Neos, what we make sure is that you have the ability to say, when I want to do, I'm doing a motor vehicle accident case, for example, that I have these things I want to do in the first 2 weeks. I want to get to these documents being sent out. I want to make this medical record request, all of these things. And as they're happening, as part of the process, you're either alerting management that they're falling behind, reminding the staff that they need to be done, and you're creating data all along the way to where you can look at your caseload and your intake load as a funnel, like a sales funnel for leads, and you're making sure that they're working their way through it and the things are getting done. And I think if you have a process for managing the cases that is repeatable, it removes the anxiety of going virtual. And I think most of the change around going virtual is really around the human anxiety part of it. So if you stack your systems and your reporting in such a way to remove that anxiety, you can feel a lot better about it. And arguably, you'll find out that you were more productive virtually than you were before, but it's a byproduct of having the process.
Right, absolutely. One of the issues, LegalSoft, we have thousands of virtual legal staff spread with 1,000+ law firms. So when we do this, one of the first questions becomes from the firms is that how safe and secure is my platform being Neo, for example, Neos, for the virtual staff globally using it and logging in and doing things like that. So where do you stand with the security and safety of the logins and the data that is collected globally? It doesn't matter if it's 100 miles away from me or 10,000 miles away from me.
Right. So we are very, very much a security first sort of operation. So one thing is that all of our processes, all of our software, all of our workloads run inside Microsoft Azure's cloud centers and data centers, which bring a ton of security to bear themselves. Then we inherit that security, and then the firm inherits security from us. So you have this shared responsibility model where the Microsoft's data centers, they're very, very secure for, I probably couldn't even tell you where they were, let alone try to walk in the doors of one of them, right? So the physical security of having a Microsoft data center is really strong. People feel comfortable having a server in their closet, but you should feel more comfortable having it inside a military grade secure environment that you don't even know the address of, and people will check your IDs and follow you around if you get lucky enough to get in the door.
Right.
It is much, much more secure physically. Then we inherit those and make software controls. So we do what we call role-based access control, which is really a good standard, which says, I'm not going to give Jim this security. I'm going to say paralegals in my firm have the ability to do this and have the ability to not do this. You are a paralegal, so you inherit those. We have 380 different levels of security in our firm, roughly a little bit more than that, to where you can basically say, you can work all of these cases, but you can't change anything that would impact the limb date. You can work on all of these cases, but you can't work on Jim's cases. You can't see those cases. You can't see case number 235. It's very, very granular. So what we basically say is, we train our firms to come on board and apply the principle of least access. Is I'm going to give you the least amount of access you need to do your job, and that's how we help keep data safe. You don't need to be able to change everything to do your job. So by giving people the least access and making sure that our platform enables that, it's a very good data protection. Then on regulatory and compliance, we're SOC 2 type 2. We get audited all the time. We adhere to privacy policies. We have great reporting that we can talk about security compliance on the regulatory front as well. But the part I always want to talk about is making sure that the firm understands their shared responsibility in that.
Right.
Is we are responsible for giving you a secure environment. You are responsible for operating in it securely. So don't share passwords. Don't do those kind of things.
Right.
Inherit what we've given you, and it can be very, very secure. And I would put the security posture of Neos up against anybody in our industry because we are so focused on it. But when you adhere to those principles, you can distribute staff globally, because it doesn't matter if I'm in Spain today or Finland today. Right. I can't access the case. My ID is I'm authenticated and I am authorized to do the things because I am me wherever I am. And as long as you adhere to that, you should be comfortable about that. The shared responsibility with the firm is a huge part. make
Absolutely.
sure that you grant that access right.
Uh, yeah, for those days, we used to call it, as you know, I spent about 20 plus years in Silicon Valley with
Yeah.
all the server infrastructures and the data warehousing and so forth. We used to call it the rule-based access control.
Yes.
So with Neo's access control, which basically is a terminology we use to be able to restrict access to very specific part of the system where the staff are working on and not giving them exposure to the rest of the system. I know you can narrow it down to very specific pages, fields, and the part of the Neos to make all of our 2,000 plus virtual legal staff
Right.
safe operating globally.
Yes.
So that's very good to hear, and it comes up a lot with the attorneys because they thought people have to sit in their office to be safe using the system, and it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. The person in the office is as much of the risk than somebody sitting globally. Is they have access to the
Correct.
system, but the access controls basically makes it simple. That doesn't matter where they are, who they are. You can fully control their access to the system. So I'm glad to see that Neos has that sort of a restrict access management. The second part that usually comes up with people wanting to switch into the software, they come either from, again, Google Sheet, Excel sheets, or a bunch of other cloud-based stuff that makes them think like it's a software, but it's really no software behind it.
Right.
It's just a data sheets. Is their data? It's like I'm moving from platform X to Neos or Excel sheet to Neos. How do I bring my data over with me?
Yeah.
And we get that all the time because they need the data that they have
Yeah.
collected over the years.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting when you're doing conversion or a migration or a transition from an on-prem system or sort of not a system at all, like with the spreadsheets and all of that. There are two aspects of this change. The data conversion and the data transformation is one, and then the human change management is the other. And there are arguments to be made that the human change management is actually the harder part because you've moved their cheese, for lack of a better way of saying it. Now I've got, I used to just type a new row in the spreadsheet, and now I have a screen. I don't know what to do, and so
Right.
dealing with that is a whole other sort of thing. But the thing to do with the data and the technology is basically, first of all, people have a propensity to be what I call digital pack rats. Is most of the retention laws in states are about 7 years and less for open cases and all of that. So just because you had a document in 1992 does not mean that you need to take that into your new system to keep
Right.
practicing law, right? Um, I always equate it to, if you're moving your house and you have a box and you left it in your garage for 2 years, did you actually need that box? Probably not, because you never went back there and opened it, right? And so a lot of times, taking data and just because I have it, moving it into the new system is not a great practice. You have to protect it once it's there. It's another front on which you could lose data, and not that I'm saying you should worry about that, but you should always make sure that if you have it, you have to protect it. The best data protection is to not have it, right? Because you can't manipulate or leak what's not there. So I would say first things first, focus on your retention laws in your state and make sure you're not just like hoarding and just taking things everywhere you go, because you,
Right.
you, you don't need it. Secondly, focus more on the destination in the past. And what I mean by that is start with your system. Let's take Neos, for example. Start with your workflows and you're building them out and how you want to practice law with that system, how it underpins the workflows you're doing. Then you put the data and you map it into that destination. What you don't want to do is take your spreadsheets or your 30-year-old system and say, I just want a cloud version of that, because you're not gaining any efficiency in that way, right? So the way that we approach these data conversions is we do what we call a discovery session. And the very first things we start asking you are more of what I'm saying. Walk me through how you do a case. Don't show me a screen of where your data is. Don't give me a data dump. Walk me through how you work a case so we can focus on your workflows and then making sure the data gets mapped to the right spots to support you in those workflows. A way that I say this, I make a lot of silly jokes and analogies. So you can, take them out if you don't like them. But I always
I
say if you
know.
have a bunch of crap and you put it in the cloud, what you end up with is cloud-based crap. So you should kind of just clean that up, right? You should have a target in mind. You should have a
Absolutely.
destination in mind and design to that. And I
I have
hope
an
that makes
interesting
sense.
story for you, Jim.
Yes,
Sorry to
sir.
interrupt you. I have an interesting story for you. Several years back, we were setting up a CRM for a very established law firm that been around for like 40 plus years, kind of a thing.
Yes.
And as we were doing this data import, at one point the U-Haul truck showed up with 30, 40, file boxes, and it said, "This is all of old data that we want to import into the system." And I'm like, "What? What
Why?
do you mean?" This is, and I looked at these boxes. They're data just like you said, you know, 20 years old, 22 years old data in paper, all in paper. I'm like, okay, they're in the storage for all this time. Why are you taking it out? You have no legal obligation to have this data any longer. And these are like 20 years old.
Yes.
Why do you want to bring them into your system? Just like you said, you bring in crap in, and you're going to have this crowded cloud-based crap database where
Yeah.
none of the data is ever useful, unless nowadays you want to do AI and the data mining and the data warehousing and stuff is one thing, but for the purpose of the practice that they're doing, going from no system to a system,
Yes.
this was such an overkill. But yeah, I
Yeah.
just remember that when you said bringing the old stuff in there that is
Yes.
useless to the
Yeah.
practice.
I was going
But
to say, you bring up a good point about the difference between transactional data and analytic data, right? Is with the transactional data, that's the data that you use all day, every day, right? I am executing. That's where you don't want all of the junk. If you have an analytic where you want all of the history, that's a different discussion. But you should not be bringing all of your historic data into your transactional data because of the clutter reasons you're talking about.
yes, yeah. I'm also glad that you mentioned about the workflow process. I come from extensive workflow process that is like 18 pages long
Yes.
workflow process. So I understand that in the legal industry or medical and so forth, they're not so familiar about the workflow process. So one of the things I always want them to do within setting up their customizing or configuring, more of a configuring a system like Neos, is to sit down. I always ask them, sit down and draw up the boxes from the minute that you retain a client, all the workflow that you have right now, and then we will make your software configure to this workflow if it makes sense. But often
Yes.
when they start drawing it up, that's where they find all the problems and overlaps. It's like, why is two people working on the same thing on my boxes? And
Right.
why is this when this is done? Why is it going to this person? What is that box about? And
Right.
then they start sort of, it begins the optimization of the workflow process that saves times and resources. So it's a good factor for them to do this exercise to
Yes.
see what happens from beginning to the end of my cases, how many people touch it, how many people need to have access to it. And when is so important to have that for implementing any kind of a software.
Yeah, absolutely. I am an engineer, and my bias is that I believe anything you're doing should be measured and diagrammed with an engineering process because it will only get better if you do that. Every problem can be solved with an engineered process. And I don't mean being an engineer, but exactly what you're saying. Let's draw the boxes. Who's doing this? How long should it be there? And what you find out a lot is that most people operate their small businesses, especially they operate in sort of an ad hoc method to where they're doing the thing, and Jim knows how to do that. That's what he does.
Right.
Great. And when you start documenting a process and saying here's a role and responsibility and how long should it be there, and configuring your system to support, report, and notify outliers to that, what you're going to find out is you start with this improvement loop as well. Is exactly what you said. Why are two people doing this one step? Okay, great. So we figure that out. 6 months later, we may find some reporting that is also showing on step three, staff member A is generally doing that in half the time of staff member B. What is it that they're doing that makes them so much more efficient? And can we make that part of the process? And your entire practice starts becoming more efficient, almost as a byproduct of just documenting the process and measuring against it, which is an engineering process. So
Right.
you get more efficient because you've got the continual improvement loop. And if you don't do this, you're just kind of wandering around through your work, which is fine and effective. But businesses generally will grow to a certain state. I always say you grow as far as your processes will take you, and then you've got to change them to grow more. Right.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
that's what we're talking about, is you get to that point where you've got to look at your process and say, I need to optimize that and that to get to the next level. And
Yeah,
only having it documented in the first place would let you do that.
absolutely. In two instances, one in the implementation of Neos like software for the firm, a personal injury firm and employment firm, when we actually work with the firm to streamline their process and the workflow process that they draw up for a pre-litigation, we were able to save about 50% of the time from retained to settlement by just optimizing the workflow process.
Yes.
So if we take him 6 months to do a pre-lead on a PI or wage and hour case, we were able to bring it to like 3, 4 months by just eliminating unnecessary steps and the boxes through the process and optimizing it. So even before the system was configured, we changed the structure and the workflow process for it. So we
Right.
had very good experience doing this before the software is configured.
Right, right. And that goes full circle to what we were talking about earlier about why when we engage a new customer who's coming onto Neos, this is exactly why we start with show me how you work a case. We start with the process because exactly what you said is get the process, get it documented out, then configure the software to support that. I think it is a mistake in technology where we come forward and say, this is how my software works, so change the way you do your job. I think that's a mistake. People generally don't care about technology. They care about doing their jobs and they care about the business they're managing. You know, software is great, but people don't truly care about it. I kind of think the best software and the best workflows are the ones that disappear into to the job you're doing so far that you can't tell the difference between your job and that software anymore. And that's why we aim at, let's work through the process. And then what we're going to do is once we lock arms as partners, you know, between assembly software and your firm, that this is how we're going to work, you know, an MVA case or an employment case, then you configure the software to support that. And it makes the transition to that system easier and more seamless for the users because you're basing it in how they practice and how they like
Right,
to manage it.
right. Great. One of the other things that I emphasize on the software implementation as a sort of a legal expertise and consultations and stuff that I do with the firms is all the statutes that needs to be followed within the litigation process and all the calendaring, all the reminders, all the flags that needs to be set up. So you don't have to always worry about it or chasing people to make sure they meet in their deadline, the firm is
Right.
meeting the deadline, especially when you have set dates from court for depositions, for filings, for motions, and all of that stuff. How is that set up in NEOS to make sure that the firm stays compliant with all the regulatory deadlines and calendaring?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's based in the fact that, you know, humans are fallible. We're going to forget things. And you know, if you're using sticky notes or Excel sheets, you're going to misplace it. All of those things happen. So when we talk about configuring a case type and a workflow in Neos, that also includes deadline dates that are based on date of incident, you know, any sort of limb date, any sort of filing date, any sort of date that is due that is from a starting date plus X. And we will automatically put those in calendars to remind people. We will remind you in the software. We actually will provide reporting to managing partners or you know, organizational leads. If you've got like a legal assistant team and there's a lead, to give them reporting to basically say you're 5 days away from needing to have this filing due.
Sure.
Make
Is
you haven't
also
said
that
it's done.
is the reminders also is triggered into any other like the app or Outlook or anything like that so they can get reminder via text, emails on the calendar designation.
Yeah, yeah.
What kind of a connectivity is there?
Neos is actually integrated into your Outlook calendar so far that when you see dates in Neos, they are actually your calendar dates in your Office 365 calendar as well. So you'll get those reminders because when you create a date, when you create a reminder in Neos, it is actually going into Office 365. And on top of that, it can be delivered to you via email. It can be delivered to you in app with, the notifications in app that say,
Right.
hey, Jim, this thing happened. So we do all of those. And you can say, for a reminder type, so for a date coming up, for a due date coming up, or for
I
an
see. So you
event
can
that has
configure
happened.
that.
Yeah.
Right.
Let me know in email, let me know in app, or let me know in both, and put it on my calendar. And
I
users can
see.
set that up because
Great.
there is a balance here. I've seen historically as well where people get what we call alert fatigue, right? Is you want to make sure that you're not getting so many alerts that you start
Right.
to ignore them, or you want them to be just right for you.
Absolutely. What is the differentiator between Neos and the rest of the players in this market? What is stands out for Neos that if you're in the panel with five of your competitors and
Yes.
everybody sort of points something out that nobody has this and nobody does that, what is your message? What makes you stand out?
Yeah, I believe we are the most configurable and extensible system on the market. We're very, very performant and scalable. But when I say extensible and configurable, what I mean is I go back to saying we don't tell you how to practice law. We don't say this is how our software works, buck up and change the way you run your practice. Is we can generate and configure to any kind of practice you run, any sort of practice group, personal injury, you can go into immigration, you go to family law. We can support all of those because we're configuring the workflow. We're letting you say, this is a case type. Here's the data I want. Here's how I want it to work. Here's a checklist. Here's where it goes from this role to this role to this role, and we report
Right.
against it. And we're not just aimed at saying, we built a system that has this one thing we believe is the right way to practice law. Please
I
do
see.
that. We come
How
at
long
it
is a
and
typical installation? How long does it take for typically to implement?
there's a spectrum on that. So basically, if you're a smaller large firm with only a couple practice types, we see people go live. We've seen people go from I bought Neos to live in about 3 weeks. If you're a larger firm, the transition is more about the human change management than it is the data and configuration. We've seen those go 6 to 8 months, but these are
The
five
larger law
600
firms.
user firms where you're doing massive trainings to get the
And,
users
and, and
comfortable.
how does that training work? So let's say a small firm that
Yeah.
you mentioned, maybe take a month or 6 weeks or 8 weeks or something like that. How much training is they need to have for themselves and the staff typically?
So typically we want to give you at least a day of training. And the way that we do it, I also think is a unique thing for us is that we will take your data and we will do a conversion and a provision and environment with your data before you actually move to Neos. And we will train you against your own data in a real Neos environment. So you're not getting trained after you go live and you're not getting trained against demo fake data. You're getting trained against your own cases and a copy of your data specifically meant to get your staff comfortable and get the configurations right. And we call that a pre-production environment. And we
Hmm.
will train you in there. Generally speaking, we want to do at least a day with everybody in the staff. For these larger firms, we're doing multiple sessions per week over the course of 6 or 8 weeks and getting all their questions answered. And really, this is a give and take with the new customer because going back to what I said at the very beginning, sometimes the human change management is the hardest part of this.
Oh,
What you don't
absolutely.
want to
The
do,
training attorneys is the most difficult thing on anything. They don't
yeah,
have a lot of attention span, and it
right.
gets very difficult, and they don't have the time, and the time is valuable. So I think the training, and they
It's
usually ask you to
huge.
train their staff, which is like a case manager, an intake person, and so forth. But in fact, they need to be trained extensively because at the end of the day, they're accountable for the entire practice and entire outcome of the CRM. So I
Yes.
always encourage the attorneys to say, I know you're busy, you don't have time, but you need to know how to work with this tool. Because a lot of people treat it like my office needed a CRM, so I got them a CRM. It's just like it's a coffee machine.
Yes.
Everybody asks for a coffee. I bought them a coffee machine, but
Yes.
and nobody in the office really truly knows how to even operate the coffee machine.
It's true.
So I emphasize on that a lot. I say you need to get involved. You need to be involved in training, optimizations, configurations, and reports and so forth. And if you can't do it, don't do it at all because it just fails.
Right. That's also a good segue into having a pool of pre-trained contractors that can go from firm to firm that already know how to use the CRM and are just helping you get onboarded. During that transition period, if you can outsource a few people to come in and help your firm get over that hump, that's always hugely beneficial. And what you're trying to avoid is, we did all of this training, we did all of this, and everybody said, yes, let's go. And then, 8 a.m. on Monday morning, somebody's hair is on fire because they didn't learn the system, and now it's real, right? And now
Right.
you're trying to work and trying to answer a client.
With the firms that we work with, I pretty much mandate them to video record, and screen record every single training about everything. It doesn't matter if it's a legal soft training, is a case management training, and to that effect, the virtual staff that we provide to these law firms, depending on the type of the CRMs that they're using, we train our virtual staff on that platform before they get deployed. So they
Which
can
is
actually,
super helpful.
yeah, so because they come ready basically, so they don't say, I need training, and there is nobody in the firm to actually spend the time to train them, especially when you're virtual. Sort of nobody has training because they're not in the same room. So we help a lot on doing those training, and we add things like NEOS training into our curriculum. So if somebody says, I need a case manager, and we say, what's software? It said NEOS. And it says, okay, so we will onboard them, train them. So when they come to the firm, they already know how to use this.
Yes.
So that's been very helpful. And that's one of the elements of our partnership with NEOS, is to have access to the platform so we can actually train our staff on that platform.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And to your point about recording training videos and all of that, another thing that we do is we have an extensive library of very small focused videos that any user can open, and it's very, very task specific. A 90-second video on how to configure a checklist, and so users can go and revisit training or get very specific help without having to sit through 4 hours of training, and it helps them stay fresh over time. Because what you see is, we go through all of these trainings, and we recording them is great, but having access to the content is helpful 9 months later or 12 months later.
Great. Thank you, Jim. This has been extremely informative, and I'm sure our audience are intrigued about finding out more about, because I'm sure there's tons more stuff that we didn't even cover about NEOS, because I've seen the system is pretty extensive, it's pretty comprehensive solution for any kind of a practice. So where would our audience go to find out more about NEOS and setting up a demonstration, consultation, and so forth with the company?
Yeah, so go to assemblysoftware.com. We've got all kinds of materials there. You can set up a demo. You can watch some pre-recorded demos and webinars and get a flavor for the system. And you can learn a ton about us on our website, assemblysoftware.com.
So they can actually go to your website and book an appointment and the consultation and so forth?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, there's some auto scheduling there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining LegalSoft podcast. This has been very informative for our audience. I'm sure they're going to get a lot of other questions that they can contact you directly, and they contact the company, and I'm sure you'll be able to help them out.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining a LegalSoft podcast. Please like us and follow us on Instagram, and we have a lot more episodes like this coming up. Thank you for joining us.